In a small, dusty village nestled among the hills of the northern regions, there lived a woman whose resilience would one day become legendary. She was not always the confident, strong figure that people came to admire. In her early years, she was just another girl growing up in a world where expectations for women were drawn with harsh lines, lines that demanded silence, obedience, and invisibility. Her name was Salma, but she was known by many simply as the Grandma, for she was a figure whose wisdom extended far beyond her years. But this wisdom, this fortitude, was not born overnight. It was crafted through years of struggle, of loss, of dreams deferred, and of countless silent sacrifices. Salma was born during the 1940s, a time when girls in her village were seen more as responsibilities than individuals with their own ambitions. Her early years were marked by a simplicity that many would later envy, a simplicity that lacked the distractions of modern life, but one that also lacked the opportunities it would later afford. She was the fourth of 7 children in a modest family, her father a farmer, her mother a homemaker. Despite the constant financial struggles, there was always food on the table, even if it wasn't much. The children, though poor, were rich in love. Salma's earliest memories were of waking up before the sun to help her mother with chores, of fetching water from the village well, and of watching her father work tirelessly on the farm. Life in the village was never easy, but it was the way of the world. Women like her mother and grandmothers bore the weight of the household, their work unacknowledged by the outside world. Salma was often told that her dreams were frivolous, that girls didn't need education or lofty ambitions. Instead, she was instructed to focus on learning how to cook, clean, and raise children, skills that would make her a good wife in the future. But Salma was different. Even from a young age, she had a spark that set her apart from the other girls in the village. She was curious, driven, and refused to believe that her purpose was confined to the 4 walls of a house. She often sneaked into the local library, hiding behind shelves of books she could barely understand, hungry for the knowledge that seemed to promise a life beyond the confines of her world. It was during these quiet moments that Salma began to dream of a different life, one where women could be more than the caretakers of families. But as much as her heart yearned for something more, reality always reigned. Her dreams were crushed by the oppressive weight of tradition and the whispers of those around her who told her to stay in her place. Her family was supportive in their own way, but they, too, believed that a girl's role was to help with the home. Her father, though loving, never fully understood her desire for something greater. "There's no need for girls to learn much," he would say. "Your job is to take care of the house, just like your mother." Her mother, although kind, echoed similar sentiments. "The world is hard, my dear. Don't waste your time dreaming of things that will never happen." But Salma's heart couldn't be tamed. She would often steal away to the nearby hills after completing her chores, sitting beneath the shade of an ancient tree, dreaming of becoming someone who could change the world, even if just a little bit. But those dreams were always followed by guilt. Could she really defy the expectations set for her? It was in the midst of these internal struggles that the first tragedy of her life struck. At the age of 15, Salma lost her mother to a sudden illness. It was a blow that shattered her world, leaving a hole that would never quite heal. Her mother had been her rock, the one who told her stories of women who fought against the odds, who carved their names into history. Now, Salma found herself thrust into the role of caretaker for her younger siblings, while her father became withdrawn and distant, lost in his own grief. The death of her mother was a pivotal moment in Salma's life. It was as if the foundation of her world had crumbled, and she was forced to rebuild it from scratch. She no longer had the luxury of simply dreaming. The reality of life came crashing down on her, and she was expected to take on responsibilities that she was ill-prepared for. But in her sorrow, something within Salma began to shift. She couldn't afford to be weak. She had to be strong, for herself and for her family. This was the first time she realized that her dreams weren't just for her, they were for the ones she loved. And so, with a heavy heart, she put aside her own desires and became the pillar of strength that her family needed. But deep inside, she made a promise to herself. She would not let the world break her spirit. She would carry on the legacy of her mother, but she would also carve her own path, a path that would lead her to become the woman she had always dreamed of being. Salma's heart always longed for more. Even as a young girl, she often found herself gazing at the stars, wondering about the vast world beyond her village. She would sneak away from the household chores when no one was watching, just to sit in the quiet of the hills, letting the cool breeze whisper its secrets. It was during these moments of solitude that she imagined a life different from the one set out for her, one where she could travel, learn, and be more than the caretaker of a household. Her dreams were not grand, at least not by the standards of her village. She didn't want riches or fame, just the opportunity to study, to speak in front of crowds, to inspire others. She fantasized about becoming a teacher or a writer, someone who could share her thoughts and knowledge with the world. But society had no space for such dreams. Women in her community were supposed to dream of marriage and children, not careers or personal growth. Each time she voiced her hopes, someone would laugh and dismiss them, telling her that girls didn't need education. They needed to know how to care for a home. Salma, however, didn't let these dismissals break her spirit. Every time she was told no, her resolve only grew stronger. She spent her evenings reading whatever books she could find, books of history, philosophy, and art that were often passed down from older generations. She didn't understand everything, but she knew that knowledge was her escape. It was her secret world, a world that no one could take away from her. At 17, Salma's life took another turn when she met Imran. He was a young man from a neighboring village, visiting for the annual festival. His charm, his smile, and his way with words enchanted Salma. They became friends, sharing dreams of a life beyond the confines of their rural world. He spoke of traveling, of seeing the world, and of becoming someone important. Salma was drawn to his ambition, his confidence, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps someone else shared her vision. As their friendship blossomed, Salma found herself falling in love. She imagined a future with him, one where they could support each other's dreams and build a life together based on mutual respect and understanding. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that love could be the catalyst for her dreams coming true. However, reality was never far behind. The village had its own rules. Imran's family, despite their warmth and kindness, had different expectations for him. They wanted him to focus on securing a stable job and marriage, not on lofty dreams. Their union was not to be. Salma was once again reminded that no matter how pure her love was, it would not be enough to change the world she lived in. Imran soon returned to his village, and though their parting was bittersweet, Salma knew in her heart that she had learned something valuable. She had glimpsed a future outside her village, a world that was not as limiting as the one she had been born into. But she also realized that love, like dreams, was not always enough to defy the constraints of tradition. At 19, Salma's family arranged for her to marry Ahmed, a respectable man from their village. He was kind but not the passionate, adventurous soul she had dreamed of. Still, Salma accepted the marriage, not out of love, but because it was the way things were done. She had long understood that girls like her didn't have the luxury of choice when it came to such matters. Marriage, she quickly discovered, was a complex world of its own. Salma became a wife and then a mother, all within the span of a few years. Her days were filled with the responsibilities of running a household, caring for her children, and ensuring that Ahmed had a clean home and fresh meals to come back to after a long day of work. But in the quiet moments, when her children were asleep and the house was still, Salma would once again dream. Her dreams no longer seemed so far-fetched. She had come to realize that she could still fight for something more, even if it was just for herself. Though her marriage and responsibilities kept her grounded, the spark within her never completely dimmed. Her children were her greatest joy, but the truth was that Salma was slowly losing the sense of self that had once defined her. She loved them with all her heart, but she also began to feel the pull of her own dreams, dreams she had hidden deep within her for the sake of her family. Balancing expectations, Salma soon faced a reality she hadn't fully anticipated. being a mother and a wife was all-consuming. Every waking hour was devoted to others: cooking, cleaning, tending to the children, and ensuring the well-being of the family. It was exhausting, and yet, she never complained. There was little room for complaint when you were fulfilling your duties as a woman in a traditional society. But somewhere in the back of her mind, Salma began to realize that the life she had imagined, one where she could balance her responsibilities with her own personal growth, was not going to be as simple as she had hoped. The pressure from both her husband and society to conform to traditional roles weighed heavily on her. She was caught between the woman she was expected to be and the woman she knew she could be. Even as she poured her energy into her family, she made a quiet vow to herself: she would not give up entirely on her dreams. She would find a way to hold on to her identity, even if it meant doing so in secret. She started taking small steps, learning how to read and write better, listening to radio programs in the evenings that taught new skills, and reading books whenever she could steal a moment. But every time she felt like she was making progress, life had a way of reminding her that she was not in control. It was during one of these moments, when Salma found herself unable to balance her dreams and her responsibilities, that a challenge arose that would change the course of her life. Salma's life as a young mother began when she gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Samina. The joy of holding her newborn in her arms was unlike anything Salma had ever experienced. The tiny hand that grasped her finger, the soft cry that filled the room, these were the moments that made all the struggles worthwhile. It was the first time she felt truly needed, truly fulfilled. Motherhood, however, was not without its challenges. Salma quickly realized that her time was no longer her own. Her dreams, which had always seemed so important to her, now seemed like distant echoes. The responsibility of raising a child, ensuring their well-being, and teaching them the values she held dear consumed her every day. In the quiet moments when Samina napped, Salma would often sit by the window, gazing at the horizon, wondering if she would ever get the chance to pursue her own dreams. She loved her daughter more than anything in the world, but the sacrifice required to care for her was beginning to take its toll on Salma's sense of self. The once vibrant, ambitious woman who had dreamed of teaching and writing had faded into the background, her aspirations buried under the weight of her responsibilities. Salma's sense of duty as a mother was unwavering. She spent her days caring for Samina and later her other children, ensuring they had everything they needed. Every meal, every clean set of clothes, and every well-organized task was a reflection of her commitment to her family. But in doing so, she often neglected herself. The exhaustion from sleepless nights and constant demands wore her down, and her own needs, emotional and physical, were left unmet. As her family grew, so did the demands placed on Salma. By the time her second child was born, Salma had fully embraced the role of homemaker. While her husband, Ahmed, worked in the fields, Salma managed the household, cooking, cleaning, and tending to the children. She worked from dawn until dusk, with little rest, all while suppressing her own desires. Salma had never been formally educated beyond her childhood, but her sharp mind and love for learning still burned brightly within her. She longed for something more, something beyond the confines of her house. But the reality of her situation was clear. As a wife and mother, her place was within the walls of the home. Society expected nothing more from her, and in some ways, neither did her husband. Though Ahmed was loving and supportive in his own way, he believed that the home was a woman's domain, and he never pushed her to pursue any personal aspirations beyond motherhood and housekeeping. The strain of balancing the demands of her family with her personal dreams weighed heavily on Salma. She had always believed that life would offer her the opportunity to chase her dreams, but now she realized that opportunities for women were scarce, especially women like her, those bound by tradition and duty. She began to feel the weight of her sacrifices, the dreams that seemed to slip further away with every passing year. Still, she did not complain. Her role as a mother and wife was sacred, and she continued to pour all her energy into her family, silently relinquishing her own desires. It was during this time that Salma's health began to deteriorate. The constant exhaustion, The physical toll of childbirth and the relentless work in the household began to catch up with her. She started experiencing severe back pain, headaches, and bouts of dizziness. Her body, once strong and resilient, was now betraying her. She visited the local doctor, who diagnosed her with chronic fatigue and stress-related ailments. The diagnosis was a wake-up call. Salma had always prided herself on her strength, her ability to endure hardship without complaint. But now, her body was telling her that she could no longer keep going at the pace she had been. She realized that, in her quest to be everything to everyone else, she had neglected herself. The thought of slowing down, of taking time for herself, felt foreign and almost wrong. She had always been taught that a woman's worth was measured by how much she could give to others, how much she could endure. But now, with her health failing, Salma was forced to confront the reality that she had neglected her own well-being for too long. As she lay in bed one evening, nursing a headache that seemed to consume her entire being, Salma reflected on her life. She had sacrificed everything for her family, but in doing so, she had lost herself. The woman who once dreamed of changing the world now found herself stuck in a cycle of sacrifice and self-neglect. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of caring for her sick child and managing household chores, Salma sat alone on the porch of her house, gazing at the stars. It was in this quiet moment of solitude that she had her epiphany. She realized that she had been living for everyone else, her children, her husband, her community, without taking the time to live for herself. Her dreams, once vivid and alive, had slowly faded into the background. But they had never truly died. They were still there, waiting for the right moment to resurface. In that moment of quiet reflection, Salma promised herself that she would reclaim her dreams, no matter how small or distant they seemed. Her journey would not be easy. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, societal expectations, family duties, and her own health struggles. But Salma knew that she could no longer live a life defined by sacrifice alone. She had to find a way to balance her responsibilities with her own needs. She had to find her voice again, the voice that had once been so full of hope and ambition. Salma's path to resilience had begun, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet decision to reclaim her identity, to remind herself that she mattered too. It was a cold winter night when the storm came. Salma had been aware of the growing tension between her and Ahmed, but it wasn't until that night that it truly surfaced. Ahmed, despite being a good man at heart, had his own insecurities, especially as their financial struggles continued to mount. He began drinking more heavily and slowly. He distanced himself from Salma. He would often come home late, his temper flaring, his words sharper than they used to be. Salma, as always, did her best to ignore the cracks forming in their relationship. She believed that a woman's role was to hold the family together, no matter what. But one night, after a particularly heated argument, Ahmed left the house in a fit of anger, vowing to return only when things were better. That night, Salma was forced to confront the harsh reality of their relationship. The betrayal was not in Ahmed's actions, but in his disregard for the emotional toll it took on her, his neglect of her needs, her dreams, and her well-being. For days, Ahmed was absent. Salma tried to keep the household together, but she felt as if the foundation of her life had crumbled. In those quiet moments, when the house was still and her children slept, she allowed herself to cry. She had always been the pillar of strength, the one who held everything together, but now, she felt fragile, like a leaf in the wind. The weight of it all was too much. This emotional turmoil led Salma to a crossroads in her life. Was she going to continue living for others, suppressing her own feelings and dreams? Or was this the moment for her to take control of her destiny? The turning point came not in the form of a grand gesture, but in the quiet decision she made in the solitude of that night. The turning point was not dramatic. There was no sudden, life-changing event, no heroic moment of defiance. Instead, it was a gradual rebirth. Salma began to realize that she had been living for everyone else, but she had never truly lived for herself. She had sacrificed her dreams, her health, and her identity for the sake of her family, and while that had been her choice, It was no longer the life she wanted to lead. One morning, after Ahmed had returned, sober and remorseful, Salma found herself sitting alone on the porch again. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. In the stillness of that moment, Salma made a vow to herself. She would no longer be defined by the roles that others had set for her. She would not let her past mistakes or the failures of others dictate her future. She would find a way to balance her family responsibilities with her own growth. It was not going to be easy. There would be setbacks, and there would be people who doubted her. But for the first time in years, Salma felt a flicker of hope, a belief that she could begin again, that she could build the life she had once dreamed of. Salma began with small steps. She started reading again, picking up the books she had once loved but had long neglected. She took an evening class on basic literacy, a small but significant victory for her. It wasn't just about learning to read and write better. It was about reclaiming a piece of herself that had been buried under the weight of motherhood and marriage. Her children, noticing the change in her, began to look at her differently. They saw her no longer as just a mother, but as a woman with her own ambitions, her own voice. This shift in perspective was subtle, but it was powerful. Salma wasn't just teaching them how to survive in the world. She was teaching them how to live fully, how to pursue their dreams, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. As Salma took these small steps, she began to notice a change in herself. The woman who had once felt overwhelmed by life's demands was now finding joy in the little things: the smell of freshly baked bread, the sound of her children's laughter, the quiet moments of reflection at sunrise. These moments, though fleeting, reminded her that life was not just about survival. It was about living with purpose, with intention. Salma's newfound sense of purpose didn't come overnight. It was a slow, steady process of reclaiming her identity, her dreams, and her strength. She began speaking more openly about her aspirations to her family, sharing her desire to work outside the home, to be a teacher, to inspire other women. At first, her family was hesitant. Ahmed, despite his remorse, was unsure of how to handle the changes in Salma. He had grown accustomed to the traditional roles she had played and was unsure of what their relationship would look like if she pursued her own dreams. But Salma didn't let this stop her. She knew that if she was going to truly change her life, she needed to take risks. She applied for a teaching position at the local school, a small but significant step toward the future she had longed for. When she was accepted, it felt like the first real victory of her life, not just for the job, but for the courage it took to pursue it. Her decision to step into the world of work was not just about career advancement. It was a declaration of independence. She was no longer just a mother, a wife, or a homemaker. She was Salma, a woman with her own goals, her own voice, and her own future. As Salma began her new role as a teacher, she discovered a sense of freedom she had never known before. For the first time in years, she had a space where her ideas, her thoughts, and her passions were valued. She became a mentor to the young girls in her class, encouraging them to pursue their dreams just as she had once dreamed of doing. Through her teaching, she not only impacted the lives of her students, but also rediscovered her own power. The change wasn't always easy. There were days when she doubted herself, when the weight of her past struggles seemed too heavy to bear. But Salma's resilience was no longer just about surviving, it was about thriving. She had learned that it was possible to build a life that balanced her responsibilities to her family with her own dreams, and she became a living example of what it meant to embrace resilience, strength, and purpose. Salma's journey of self-discovery and personal growth was not one that went unnoticed. Her decision to become a teacher was just the beginning of a transformation that rippled through her community. As she gained confidence in her role, her presence became a source of inspiration for many women who, like her, had been confined by the rigid expectations of society. The women in the village had always known Salma as a dedicated mother and a hardworking homemaker, but now they saw her as a symbol of something more. She wasn't just a woman fulfilling the roles expected of her. She was a woman with ambitions, with dreams, and most importantly, with the courage to pursue them. Salma's story spread through the village like wildfire. The women who had once been confined to their homes began to see her as a living example of the possibilities that existed beyond the limitations they had accepted for so long. Many of them were inspired by her determination and bravery. They sought her advice on how they could, too, break free from the chains of tradition and pursue their own passions. Salma became a mentor to many of these women, encouraging them to embrace education, pursue careers, and believe in their own potential. She organized small gatherings where they could talk about their dreams, share their challenges, and support one another. These meetings, though informal, became a lifeline for women who felt isolated in their struggles. Through these sessions, Salma began to realize just how much her story resonated with others. She was no longer just a teacher. She had become a leader, a guide, and a source of strength for women who were yearning for change. Salma's role as a mentor extended beyond the classroom. She helped women learn to read and write, guiding them through lessons that she herself had once struggled with. She encouraged them to start their own businesses, to seek work outside the home, and to never let anyone tell them that their dreams were too big or too impossible. One of the women she helped was Fatima, a young widow who had been struggling to support her children. Fatima had always believed that the only way for a woman to survive was through marriage, but after meeting Salma, she began to see a different path. Salma taught her how to read and write, helped her find a job at a local store, and encouraged her to start a small tailoring business on the side. Through Salma's guidance, Fatima gained the confidence to believe in herself and her abilities, and her life began to change for the better. Salma also worked with young girls in the village, teaching them that their worth was not defined by their ability to get married, but by their strength, intelligence, and ability to pursue their own dreams. She became a champion of female education, encouraging families to send their daughters to school and to value education as a means of empowerment. Salma's impact on the community went beyond the academic. She became a pillar of emotional support for many women who had never felt heard or valued. Through her efforts, the village slowly began to change. Women started to find their voices, to speak out about their dreams, and to challenge the norms that had once kept them silent. Despite the positive changes in the community, Salma's journey was not without its personal struggles. Her relationship with Ahmed continued to be strained. While he had initially supported her decision to become a teacher, his insecurity and reluctance to embrace her newfound independence created tension between them. Ahmed, though not a bad man, had been raised in a society where a woman's place was firmly in the home, and he struggled to adapt to the idea of Salma stepping into the public sphere. There were many nights when Salma and Ahmed would argue, their differences seeming insurmountable. She wanted to be more than just a wife and mother. She wanted to be an active participant in the world, to leave a legacy for her children. But Ahmed, though he loved her, was fearful of the changes she was making. He didn't understand how the roles he had always known could shift, and the tension between them grew. Salma, however, refused to be swayed. She loved Ahmed, but she loved herself and her dreams more. She understood that her growth was not a rejection of him or their family, but an opportunity to enrich their lives and the lives of others. Over time, she learned to navigate these challenges, making compromises where necessary, but always staying true to her commitment to herself and her purpose. As Salma continued to help others, she also began to rebuild her relationship with her children. She had always been a loving mother, but now, she was not just a provider of physical care. She was a role model, a woman they could look up to. Her children, especially her daughters, began to see their mother not just as a figure of authority, but as a strong, independent woman who had the courage to challenge the world around her. Her son, Sammy, who had once been reluctant to accept his mother's changing role, began to admire her strength. He saw her not as the quiet, passive woman who had once been confined to the household, but as a trailblazer who had the power to change the world. His respect for her grew as he saw the positive impact she was making on the lives of others. Salma's children, inspired by her example, began to pursue their own dreams with greater confidence. Her daughters, once resigned to the idea of marriage being their only path, began to pursue education and careers of their own. Salma had not only shown them the power of resilience, but also the power of choice. A beacon for future generations, Salma's work didn't stop at her immediate community. As her influence grew, she became involved in regional women's rights organizations, advocating for education and the empowerment of women across the region. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and became a well-known figure in the movement for women's rights. Salma had become a symbol of resilience and strength, not just in her own community, but across the country. Her story was shared in newspapers and magazines, and she was invited to speak on television and at universities. She was no longer just a teacher or a mentor. She had become a beacon of hope for women everywhere, a woman who had faced insurmountable odds and emerged victorious. Her legacy was not in the titles she held or the accolades she received, but in the lives she touched. The women she mentored, the children she raised, and the communities she transformed would carry her story forward for generations to come. As the years passed, Salma's life took on a rhythm of its own. Her role in the village had transformed from that of a young woman with dreams to a respected figure, a matriarch, a teacher, a mentor. But with age came new challenges, both physical and emotional. Her body, once strong and resilient, now showed the signs of time. The long hours spent working, the sacrifices she had made for her family, and the constant emotional toll of her journey had all taken their toll on her. Salma's back, which had once carried the weight of her children and her household without complaint, now ached with every movement. Her hands, which had once expertly crafted meals, mended clothes, and held her children close, now trembled slightly as she wrote on the chalkboard for her students. Yet, despite the physical decline, her spirit remained as strong as ever. It was in these later years that Salma began to look back on her life with a sense of gratitude, even as she faced the challenges of aging. She no longer felt the weight of regret for the things she had not achieved. Instead, she found peace in knowing that she had lived a life filled with purpose, a life that had impacted the lives of many others. She had fought for her own dreams, and in doing so, had helped others realize that their dreams were worth fighting for too. As Salma aged, she became even more committed to her work as a mentor. The younger women she had once inspired now came to her for guidance, and she took great pride in seeing them succeed. Many of the girls she had taught to read and write had gone on to become teachers, doctors, and businesswomen. They returned to her, thanking her for showing them the way. But for Salma, the greatest reward was not in the accolades or the recognition. It was in the quiet moments when one of her former students would come to her with tears in their eyes, telling her that they had achieved something they had once thought impossible, thanks to her encouragement, her belief in them, and her example. Salma knew that this was the true legacy of her life. Her children, too, had grown into strong, independent individuals, each finding their own path in the world. Her daughters had gone on to pursue higher education, while her son Sammy had become a community leader in his own right. Salma had taught them all the importance of resilience, self-worth, and the power of choice. They were her pride and joy, and she had watched them grow into the kind of people who could make a difference in the world. In her later years, Salma found comfort in the knowledge that she had given her children and the women in her community the tools to live their own lives on their own terms. She had raised them to believe in their own strength and to never let the world tell them what they could or couldn't do. This, she realized, was the true measure of her success. Though Salma's spirit remained as strong as ever, her health continued to deteriorate. She had always been a fighter, but her body was no longer able to keep up with her unyielding will. The fatigue that had once been a constant companion now became more pronounced. Her back pain became debilitating at times, and she found herself needing help with simple tasks. But even in her vulnerability, Salma remained determined to live each day to its fullest. She began to accept the fact that her time on this earth was limited. The idea of slowing down was foreign to her, but she knew it was necessary. Her children insisted on taking her to the doctor regularly, and she began to slow her pace, taking more time to rest and reflect. Still, she continued to teach, to mentor, and to inspire as best she could, even if it was in smaller ways. There were days when the weight of her health struggles felt too much to bear. Yet, Salma never complained. Instead, She found peace in knowing that she had done all she could. She had fought the battles that had come her way, and now, in her later years, she could finally rest, knowing that her work was far from over. Salma's grandchildren were a constant source of joy in her later years. They brought light into her life in ways she had never expected. Watching her children raise their own families, Salma saw how the values she had instilled in them were now being passed down to the next generation. Her oldest granddaughter, Layla, was especially close to her. Layla had always admired her grandmother's strength and resilience and had grown up hearing the stories of Salma's struggles and triumphs. Layla had also become a teacher, just like Salma, and she often came to visit, eager to hear her grandmother's wisdom. It was through these conversations that Salma realized that her legacy would live on in the hearts and minds of her grandchildren. They would carry her story with them, teaching the next generation about the importance of resilience, of never giving up, and of always fighting for what was right. Salma had seen so many women in her life, young and old, become empowered through education, mentorship, and support. She knew that this was her legacy. It wasn't just the lessons she had taught, but the examples she had set. She had shown everyone around her that it was possible to rise above circumstances, to break free from the limitations placed upon you, and to carve out your own path. She had become a beacon of hope for those who had none. As Salma sat by the window one final time, watching the sun set over the horizon, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had lived a life full of challenges, of hardships, of sacrifices. But she had also lived a life full of love, of learning, of growth. She had learned to be resilient, to be strong, and to believe in herself even when the world told her she couldn't. She had fought for her dreams, for her children, and for the women she had mentored. And in doing so, she had left a mark on the world, a mark that would never fade. Salma had never sought fame or recognition. All she had ever wanted was to live a life of purpose. And in the end, she knew that she had achieved that. As she closed her eyes for the final time, surrounded by the love of her family and the memories of her journey, Salma smiled, knowing that her story would live on, not in the pages of books, but in the hearts of those whose lives she had touched.